So we're here today with Commonwealth Court judicial candidate Josh Prince.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jessica. It's a distinct honor and privilege to be here with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. When did you first want to know that you wanted to become a lawyer, and was there anything specific that triggered that decision?
So I've pretty much known my entire life that I wanted to be an attorney. I am a fourth-generation attorney. It's in the blood, but my parents couldn't have cared less what I did. However, ever since I was a young man, I knew I wanted to help people. And even while I was in high school, the school I went to, the Hill School, had a process where if anyone got in trouble with the school, they couldn't have anyone but a fellow student represent them in what they called a disciplinary board hearing. And so I actually got experience as a young man representing my fellow students, helping them when they'd get in trouble. So I knew right when I was in high school that this is what I wanted to do. If I could have gone right from high school to law school, I would have, but that wasn't a possibility. But the reason is I want to help people.
That's wonderful. So what are the top 3 cases that you've litigated, and why are you so proud of them?
Wow. The first one that comes to mind would be a case I handled early on in my career in Lehigh County. It was a young woman who fled New York because she was a victim of domestic violence, and her child was as well. She came here to try and escape that, and the father of the child followed her here. He then filed for custody, not because he cared at all about the child. In fact, he had caused a bleed on the child's brain while in New York and was prosecuted for that. But rather, he wanted to stay involved in her life. She didn't have any money, she didn't have any options, and she came to our firm. And I represented her pro bono, went in the court with the police reports. Under Pennsylvania law, where there's any form of violence like that, there has to be psychological evaluations, anger management evaluations, things of that nature. So the judge ordered that, and the father never went through with it because, again, he never really cared at all about having any custodial time with this child. Another case that I'm currently handling is one involving an individual of the Amish faith who's being forced to choose between his First Amendment religious belief rights and his Second Amendment rights. He's being forced by the US government to have to decide whether to violate his religious tenets by having a photo taken of himself or not exercising his Second Amendment rights. And that's abhorrent because I think we can all agree there is a way to prove our identities in the absence of photo ID because none of us are born with photo ID. And yet, even though the federal government has laws and regulations on how we prove our identity to get that photo identification, they won't give him that same right. And probably another case that really mattered a great deal to me was a case I was involved in during the original COVID mandates. A lot of people are unaware the original COVID mandate actually forced the closure of all law firms so no one could challenge those executive fiats. Also, you had issues of parents who couldn't get custody orders. You had parents who were violating custody orders and there was no contempt proceedings because attorneys were precluded from coming into the office. And so I filed a special petition with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court referred to as a King Bench application, where you basically ask the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to immediately hear the case because it's of such paramount importance. And within 48 hours of filing that, Governor Wolf found that law firms were essential, allowed to reopen. We then went on to represent a lot of small businesses that were being fined by the administration. One that a lot of people have heard of is Taste of Sicily out in the Lebanon County area. They were fined close to $100,000 for alleged violations, and we were successful in getting all of those fines thrown out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we're very proud of that. And we went on to represent a bunch of other small businesses that were in a similar situation, as well as we had a number of school boards and school officials contacting us about pressure that was being placed upon them by the administration over forced masking and vaccinations. Mm-hmm. They felt that wasn't right. We agreed. We said that's a parental rights issue.
Absolutely.
That's not a school board, school official issue. So we provided them some legal advice. Later on, the Commonwealth Court would actually declare that the masking mandate was unlawful, but at that point it had already become moot because of changes in the law and the mandates. But I'd say those are 3 cases across my career that really stand out and really were important to me and that I'm very proud of.
That is definitely something to be proud of.
Thank you.
And I'm proud of you. So what made you decide to run for judge, especially after not getting the endorsement and having a successful civil rights practice?
So my concern has been the issuance of what I refer to as political instead of judicial decisions by the courts. And in my opinion, this needs to end. We need judicial candidates who will actually rein in the judiciary and only uphold the law as written in the Constitution as intended. And unfortunately, too frequently, we're not seeing that from the courts. Our founding fathers provided us with three co-equal branches of government, and yet we see the judiciary in some instances acting almost as kings and queens and just making the law, executing on the law, and then any interpretation goes back to them. And that is the polar opposite of what was intended by our founding fathers. And I actually have a little bit of background in actually getting into a position and reigning in power, because I know probably many of your viewers in that are thinking, yeah, that sounds like a great thing, but who's actually going to do that? People get into power and they don't restrict their own power. But I'm the past president of the Pottstown Police Athletic League, and while I was there, I saw that our bylaws were very deficient, and so I took it upon myself to start to amend them. I drafted a copy. We met as a board to review them, made some changes to them. And because we received a lot of funding from LaSalle University, one of the agreements was any major changes, LaSalle would send their nonprofit group in to review it before we implemented it. And so they came in, met with me, we sat down, and they said, Mr. Prince, are we correct you're the president? And I said, yes, that's correct. And they said, are we correct that you drafted these bylaws? And I said, well, by and large, yes, but we met as a board. We did make some changes, but I'm the only attorney on the board. And yeah, I basically drafted them. And they looked at me and they started shaking their heads and they said, Mr. Prince, we don't understand. And I said, you don't understand what? They said, Mr. Prince, you put all these checks on the president's power. We never see that. We've never seen that. We don't understand why. And I said, it's not about me. I believe I have the right North Star. It's about everyone that comes after me and making sure that they always remember that their duty here lies with the best interest of the organization. And so I was putting in place guideposts so they never lose sight of the fact that they're there for the best interest of the organization.
Absolutely. That is really, really thoughtful and definitely forward thinking. That's the type of person that we need.
Thank you.
So why do you feel like you're the most qualified candidate for the Commonwealth Court?
Well, I've spent my entire career defending our civil rights in the state and federal courts. I am most well known for my Second Amendment advocacy, but I've handled all forms of constitutional issues in the state and federal courts, religious freedom, freedom of speech, equal protection, due process, even some issues with what constitutes reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. I actually secured a major decision from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that overturned a legion of precedent from the Superior Court and lower courts. And I have successfully litigated a number of issues that they refer to as issues of first impression, the first time the courts have ever addressed them, and I was successful in having those cases decided in my client's favor. In relation to the Commonwealth Court, I've spent a lot of my career before that Commonwealth Court, and I don't know if your listeners are aware, but it's actually the only court in the nation that acts both as a trial court and an appellate court, depending on the legal issue before it. So anytime you sue the Commonwealth or a Commonwealth agency, it actually acts as a trial court where it takes in evidence, makes rulings on objections, admissibility of evidence, issues findings of fact, also determines credibility of witness testimony, and then issues final rulings. And then in its appellate capacity, anytime an administrative agency issues a determination you don't agree with, so let's say the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue contends you owe a tax and you disagree with that, any appeal of that determination would go up before the Commonwealth Court. So I've litigated in front of it, both acting as a trial court as well as an appellate court. I actually hold a number of injunctions issued by the Commonwealth Court against Commonwealth agencies and officials for violating our rights. Just in the past 4 years alone, just in relation to the Commonwealth Court, I've litigated 10 cases before it. I've already been successful in 8 of those, which statistically is virtually unheard of for an attorney to have that type of success rate in front of the judges, or in front of an appellate court, I should say. And what I truly attribute that to is the fact that all I've ever asked the court to do is uphold the rule of law as written and the Constitution as intended. And that's why I believe I would make a great Commonwealth Court judge. I already have a number of decisions from all of our appellate courts ruling that the arguments I make in favor of my clients are grounded in the law and Constitution.
Awesome. So what are your views on the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of Pennsylvania in regards to how you interpret those documents as a Commonwealth Court judge?
So I think what's really important is we understand the fact that the constitutions were enacted by our founding fathers and we the people as what we wanted. And they say what they say and they don't say what they don't say. Our founding fathers and we the people provided a mechanism, an amendment process, if they ever no longer suited our purpose. It was not for the judiciary or the General Assembly to change our constitutional rights. It's for we the people to do that. And so my entire practice has always focused on that. And we've actually seen that in a recent U.S. Supreme Court case, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, where the U.S. Supreme Court said that when you're interpreting the U.S. Constitution or an amendment thereof, you go back in time to the time of founding to understand what was intended at that time. And if the law is inconsistent with that, it would be unconstitutional. With the caveat, obviously, that if we the people don't like what that constitutional provision provides, we always have the opportunity to amend it.
Okay. What are the main points you want anyone watching to take away from this interview?
I've spent my entire career defending our civil rights in the state and federal courts. I know what it is to handle trials and appeals. My primary opponent has never stepped foot in a courtroom before. And I think that's an important factor for residents here in the Commonwealth and voters to consider in deciding who they want on the Commonwealth Court as their next Commonwealth Court judge. As I mentioned before, this court is unique in the sense that it hears both trials and appeals, and it's the only court in the nation that does that. So while I don't know that necessarily any candidate for that office needs to have experience both in appellate practice and trial practice, they clearly need to have some experience. I don't know how you can rule on an objection never having made an objection. And so I really would just ask that the voters and listeners look at my credentials, look at the cases I've litigated, because I do believe it's important for voters to have what I'd refer to as a bellwether, to know what the candidate stands for and the types of legal arguments that they've made in the past, to try and act as that guidepost to let you know where they stand in relation to statutory law, the separation of powers between our co-equal branches of government, and things of that nature. When you don't have that background, if the candidate is an attorney and they haven't litigated, or if the person somehow is a judge and hasn't issued decisions, which is really an impossibility. But with a judicial candidate, you can look to those decisions to know, get a feel for where they stand in relation to upholding the law as written in the Constitution as intended. I would also say that if you go on our website, Prince for Justice, that's PRINCEFORJUSTICE.com. There's a lot of information about myself on there. There's actually, if you scroll down on the homepage, just a little bit, a podcast interview I did recently. It is a little bit long, it's about 40 minutes, but I talk about family, talk about ethics, talk about cases I've litigated. And I truly believe if you take the time to listen to that, you'll know not only the type of candidate that I am, but the type of person I am. And I think that's important. I think all the voters in this great Commonwealth need to know who the candidates actually are on a personal level. And that's also why we've been going across this Commonwealth trying to meet with voters and get the word out. I love taking questions. If you do have questions, please reach out to us. We also have a Facebook page. You can find that just by typing in Prince for Justice on Facebook. And we also have Twitter and Instagram as well. But I truly do love answering questions. So if you do have questions, please reach out to us. I'm happy to answer them to the extent I can. Obviously, judicial candidates can never state how they would rule in any particular case because the justice is supposed to be blind. And that's imperative for our judicial system. Unfortunately, as I alluded to earlier, current day, we don't always see that. A lot of times we're seeing political instead of judicial decisions being rendered. So with that, I just ask that you please take the time to vet me and I hope I can earn your vote.
Thank you so much for coming on today. And I wanted to just say, get out to vote on May 16. And definitely, if you agree with these things, vote Josh Prince.
Thank you, everyone. Hope I can earn your vote.